Hello, everyone, and welcome to my guest, Cole Smith. Cole is an author, marketing consultant, and creative vision strategist. In 2017, she was determined to finish a book, and she discovered that in the end, who she became in the process was more important than the finished book itself. She then created Social Media Storyteller to help people tell their stories online, and now coaches other writers to craft a writing life they love. She lives in West Virginia with her husband, where they mountain bike when it isn't raining. And I love that because whether you can tell or not right now, it's raining. But it's actually kind of soothing for me. So anyway, welcome, Cole. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Elena.
Good. So when you and I talked ahead of time, and based on what you've been going through and why I invited you to be on the podcast, you're going through the challenge and the stress of this realm of letting go of possessions, navigating the emotional life. And most of this is because you're helping other people through this. And so it's like, how do you navigate you wanting to approach it in the way that you want to approach it and wanting to help them versus allowing them to still be at choice with the letting go?
Well, it's a huge consideration because I'm helping both sides of the family. So both my side of the family and my husband's side of the family. So I approach those groups differently because I'm aware that I'm, the daughter-in-law in one situation and I'm the daughter in another situation and the cousin. So I am able to speak in different ways to those different groups. But it's always a balancing act because, and then you and I have some common interests too, so I'm sure this will resonate with you. It's always the tension between the individual and the group.
Yeah.
So I'm really committed to individualism, but it would be naive for me to think that my choices don't affect the rest of my family. And certainly their choices are affecting me. And, we're seeing that happen in real time and change over time at the same time as our relationships and our roles to one another change. So that's the big question. My husband and I, we have many long discussions about this and the approach that we should take and how to remain respectful to people. And ultimately, I'm pushing for conversations so that I can help people get what they want, while at the same time trying to be clear and respectful about what I want. And when those things collide and when those things align. So you really hit the nail on the head because that's always at the center almost of all of these issues and these tasks.
I see this. I've experienced it myself. And I see this all the time, especially after someone has lost someone in their family. And then the family is left to deal with or handle or make decisions, sometimes hard decisions about the stuff that's left behind. So yeah, it's and then how that either surfaces or creates certain dynamics between those relationships.
Right. And, sometimes you have to not react. You have to be careful to thoughtfully respond to it because a lot of times their reaction has nothing to do with me.
Right.
It has to do with something from childhood frequently or a fear about the future and not about, not necessarily about what is actually happening. So sometimes I have to dig because it's not obvious to me what's going on. So I ask a lot of questions. And it's funny because even being careful to ask questions rather than make recommendations, people will assign motives to me that I don't always have just because I'm asking questions. So I have to be very careful to say, yes, even though I asked about that thing, I'm not advising you, or I don't necessarily think you should do XYZ. I'm just asking to get a picture of all the options here and hearing what your preference is so that I know for future reference how to help you get what you want and how to make sure that your interests are clear ahead of time before we're in, the crucible.
Well, what I'm hearing in that is, and sometimes questions can come across this way, is that questions can be leading questions and people can experience them or perceive them as coercive or manipulative, or that you're trying to guide them in a very specific direction more because of what you want versus with the true genuine intention of truly asking and wanting to know.
Yeah, and that happens a lot with my father and I because he's having some cognition issues. And so he gets very defensive very quickly. He'll say, well, I know a lot about this topic and I'm not stupid. I wasn't born yesterday. I really have done this before. And I'm kind of going like, whoa, I don't have any of those thoughts in my head right now. So I live in here, so I know that's not what I'm thinking. So I have to be careful about my tone and my questions with him because he sees questions as doubting his ability, when really it's him feeling insecure about his ability and him feeling scared, that he's noticing this loss and this brain fog that he's dealing with right now. And I'm encouraging him. I hope that that's temporary. He's going through some medical stuff. It's not necessarily something super serious or permanent, but I have to be careful to reassure him and remind him of all the times that I seek his guidance just because of his expertise. So I have to almost remind him. I said, just treat me like a kid that has no agenda and no experience in this topic, because, and then he will question. He'll be like, well, how do you not have opinion about this? I go, because I don't know anything about it. That's why I'm asking you these questions. And so then that gives him kind of an off ramp that's not confrontational. But he is kind of skeptical about, and this is maybe a symptom of our modern society and our being on social media and everybody's posting their opinions all the time, but he is kind of skeptical that I actually don't form opinions about things I don't know anything about. So that's going to take some time to convince him that I do truly feel that way. So
that's good. This is helpful in terms of the art of communication. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to what you're going through, especially those of us in our stage of life who still have parents, or maybe, they went through it before their parents passed. But on the topic of letting go of possessions, I did something kind of radical a couple years ago. I had bought a house. I fulfilled my lifelong dream of buying a house, and it had been renovated, but it needed a few little things done. So I did some projects and I filled it up with furniture and artwork, and I put everything up. And then I went through what I call a significant awakening. And then I realized I don't want to be here. And so, to cut to the chase, the radical thing I did was, and it wasn't an easy thing to get to. But once I made the decision, I let go of about 95% of my belongings. I sold what I could and I got rid of the rest and filled up my car and drove across country. It's a whole much longer story, but to keep it to this topic, I went through that. And I've moved a lot. And I used storage services and transportation services to ship stuff. But this time my instinct was like, no, get rid of it, let it go. I even let go of some family heirlooms that were sitting in a cabinet and, sold them or gave them to people that I knew would actually use them and appreciate them. So, and all that to say, it's like, even though I don't feel like I lived in a home that was cluttered, for some, it can be experienced as like a radical decluttering, and really exposes our attachment. Like I really felt that going through that whole process of confronting or facing my own attachment to those things. Like, how do you think that shapes our our quality of life?
Well, having to go through other people's stuff, including people who passed away before I was even born, it really will change your perspective about your relationship to the things around you, your material possessions. Because, in the Bible, it talks about dealing with the plank in your own eye before you worry about the speck in your brother's eye. So I just want to preface this, like, I have a lot of work to do as far as decluttering goes. Like, I'm preaching to the choir here. However, and for context, I'm the conservator guardian for a cousin of mine who is 70, and his parents are both gone, but they set up a trust for him. He's a protective person with a cognitive disability. So they had plenty of time to know that he would need extra care and looking out for. But one thing that kind of got cobbled onto that agreement was this deed of life trust, where we're not allowed to sell the house as long as he's alive to prevent him from being homeless. However, he's not living in the house now. He's at a facility, which he loves. So we have to get special court permission from all these other beneficiaries in order to sell the house to pay for his care. So that's, just for the viewers, that's the context. So there were 3 lifetimes of junk in that house and treasures. A lot of it was much better and nicer than the things that we buy now. A lot less plastic, a lot more wood, a lot more glass, lots and lots of china that cannot be microwaved because it has that little silver ring around it. And you start out, especially for me as a writer, I very easily form stories about things and give them a history and start to fill in the blanks just automatically because that's the way my mind works. So it's very draining mentally to have to make all those decisions about those things because my mind springs out ahead of me and I can imagine the history that this has or the future that it might have with somebody else or with me or with another relative or the uses you can have for this. And you just have to kind of cut it off before your brain spins away without you about all the possibilities of this one thing, because you look around the room and you just have many, many things to have to decide about. So in hindsight, I would have just ripped the bandage off and had a company come in and help us rather than just whoever had the time to go over and deal with that stuff, because it has drug out. And then you're left with just weird things that you're not allowed to throw away. But a company who does this probably would know how to deal with it better.
Yeah.
Piano is a weird thing that nobody wants anymore, but it's you can't just set it out for the trash bin to take. Like, that would be a crime, right? So it has changed the way that I shop, which I was not a big shopper to begin with. But now in my mind, I just think, like, is this something that somebody else is going to have to deal with one of these days? And I always joke with people that I'm living in clutter, but I'm a minimalist at heart. So a funny but awful thing that happened in our neighborhood during 2020 was there was a mudslide. So one of the houses in our neighborhood got knocked off its foundation, and they were not allowed to go back in and get their stuff. But the sheriff said, this is going to be condemned, so we'll give you, X amount of hours to just carry out the stuff. And after that, you can't go inside. They had, no warning about this whatsoever. So all the other neighbors were talking about how awful this was, and everybody was pitching in. And Alana, in the back of my head, I was like, they don't have to worry about all that stuff anymore. They can start from scratch. And then you just wonder, like, well, why am I holding on to all this stuff then? If in the back of my mind, it's at the point where I can still see the silver lining of a sudden disaster. Like, why am I overthinking all the stuff? Like, just get rid of it. But the difference between the generations too has been striking. So my in-laws grew up with not very much, especially my mother-in-law. Like they were pretty poor. There were 8 siblings, and so they just never had enough to go around. Well, she's been accumulating things, pretty things, because she never had those, and they make her feel really good. When I go over there, they make me feel very claustrophobic, and I think that's probably a shared experience for lots of people. And I've got an older cousin who says, well, your generation is the paper plate generation. They don't have anything nice. And so I agree with her. I say, yes, we are more about experiences, I think, than the accumulation, because we never wanted for any material possessions. We always had enough.
Yeah.
So you begin to see the differences between the generations more strikingly, I think, when you have something like this.
So much I could say about that, but where you just naturally led us to was we were talking about your mother-in-law, and she
Mm-hmm.
makes these teddy bears, and it's become part of her identity, and that has led to her accumulation, and part of it
Mm-hmm.
stems from what you were just talking about. So, um, it's like that you were saying, it's sort of like probably a dopamine hit from the accumulation of having because she didn't have before. And it's filling a void, and
Mm-hmm.
it's often an emotional void. So it leads me to question, like, where can we find that purpose beyond possession? But, what's I'd share more with us about that situation. And
Yeah, so it is kind of this Venn diagram of illness and recovery from surgery. She had a major surgery, and she didn't feel well for a long time. And she told us later, she said, I didn't think I would ever feel well after that. And a desire to be useful and to keep doing things, and that attraction for accumulating pretty things. So the Venn diagram of those three situations was that she found a pattern for these nice teddy bears. I probably should have had one here to show you. They're like, 16 inches tall,
wow.
and they have a beautiful grosgrain ribbon around the neck, tied in a bow. And she finds designer fabrics to make them in different patterns, and she'll find out your favorite colors, and she'll make them like that. So what started out as just a way to feel like she was getting something done during the day, even though she felt like she was ill and recovering. She didn't have enough strength, but she thought, I can sew, I can do this. And she started to make some for close family friends and people at her church. And then the more people saw them, the more requests for them she got. And then she just became energized by this. She became the teddy bear lady. And at some point I said, well, you probably need to open like a little Etsy shop and sell these. And she goes, oh, they're not good enough. People wouldn't want to pay for them. Well, because of what I do, I said, people are telling you and validating the concept that they are valuable. So she just, it got to the point where I would come over to visit her, and she'd say, take a seat. And I'd go in the living room, and the whole couch and both recliners were covered with teddy bears. And their little plastic eyes were just staring at me. And so you'd kind of have to, squish down in between the teddy bears or put them somewhere. They were just proliferating bears. And so I would get a count from her every time I went over. And I think at this point I think she's in the 300 or 400s now of making these bears. And so they would buy out, the stuffing and the fiber fill at Walmart. They would go to the fabric stores every week to see if they got new shipments and new different fabrics in. We'd go to Amish country to look at fabric stores and to get the noses and the eyes and more ribbon. And so, it got to the point where she was storing a lot of this in a spare bedroom on top of a bed that already had stuff on it. So then the thing that you and I were talking about is I spent 4 weeks over there, and I ended up spending the night on the couch instead of the spare bedroom because the bears had overtaken the bedroom, and neither of them felt like going through that stuff right then, because that, it wasn't a planned stay. I was supposed to have been there for 4 nights while my father-in-law was in the hospital, and it ended up that they needed a little more assistance, and so I was there for 4 weeks. And so I sort of started to resent the bears a little bit because they were sleeping on my bed, so it became like this twisted Goldilocks. But she has become known as the bear lady now. And so I think a part of her would like an off ramp to stop making the bears, especially now that she feels like she's got more strength in recovery. But now she feels a little bit trapped because she feels obligated to keep making these because she wants to be fair. If she made these bears for these families, then she didn't get around to that family, so she still owes them bears in her mind somehow. And so I told her she's got her own Build-A-Bear workshop
Yeah.
going in the house there.
Well, it's and what you're surfacing is, and I've experienced this also in my life, facing my own sense of obligation and what it used to cause me to do or not do. And then, and years ago, I got to a point where I thought, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not doing anything out of obligation, which in communicating that to other people, such as family members, which means that if I am doing something, it's because I'm not doing it out of a sense of obligation. I'm doing it because I want to, and it means something to me. So it's a reframe. But yeah, it's really interesting how it sounds like that sense of obligation became an obsession, became part of her identity. And now she's having a hard time letting go of it because who is she going to be without it? And how will people, caring about what other people think and not wanting to hurt them or let them down, or it's like what an emotional turmoil to go through.
Well, and it's the uncertainty too. Like, I feel better right now, but what if I feel bad again? This kind of gave me something to do in that situation. If I put all of it away and then I feel bad again, I'll have to drag it all out again, or I'll have to find these things again. And maybe I won't be able to then, and then I'll be stuck.
And it's interesting because teddy bears, metaphorically, it provides comfort. So for her in making them, it's like this thing to lean on. It's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. So all of this also points to, because it's very much part of the experience, end of life planning. And I know I've seen it in society. It's sort of taboo or to talk about end of life planning, and it's like to talk about death openly. How can all of this help people realize to live life with more intention? And this also, I was thinking about all this because of our conversation and how you shared that there's a significant age difference between you and your husband. And so it probably makes you think about mortality in a different way for him, for yourself, and for you to also, now that you're having to clear other people's stuff out, how does all of this make you think now about living life with intention?
Well, I must think differently than most people, because in my opinion, you have very little control over your circumstances at birth. And birth is always celebrated. Happy birthday. And it's a joyous occasion. And of course, death is separation and loss. And so nobody likes to think about those things when they're paired that way. However, you have much more control over the circumstances of your death than you do your birth.
True.
And so, now accidents happen. Of course, there are unforeseen things. No one's going to live forever. We're all thinking adults and we acknowledge those uncertainties. But I know that if I eliminate certain risky behaviors, my choices get better for living a long and healthy life. I know that if I, take my health and fitness seriously, that's going to give me better outcomes in my older age. And then, so for my husband and I, when he and I first met, I remember I was in college and I was telling my dad about this great guy. And my dad said, yeah, it sounds like you need to find a younger version. And I just that just cut through me. Like, a younger version wouldn't be the same person. So I had to make the choice then. Would I rather spend my life with this great guy, knowing that statistically we're not going to get as much time as I would with a younger version, so to speak? And so we had to address that in the beginning of our relationship, and to know that time is short and that all we have is today, and that we're probably not going to get to some of those milestone anniversaries. And you never know, I could be the first one to go. And like we said, they're always different circumstances, and nobody knows the future. But knowing at the outset that affected our choices. Like we decided to travel earlier. We're not going to wait till retirement to travel and do some of the things we want to do. We're going to do that now. And, not go crazy, but just make sure that we get the experiences that are meaningful to us instead of waiting for one day. And so I suppose that setting out in a marriage like that has given me a different perspective. Or maybe I'm controlling because I'm thinking about circumstances at the end of life are more controllable than how you're born and to whom you're born. But I have noticed that it bothers other people to talk about it. Because I'll ask people, I'll say, well, how long do you want to live? And people just, wince, or they rear back and they go, I don't know. I don't want to think about that. So, and then I have an answer, it's kind of like, well, I'm, probably early 90s. I think that would be pretty good. I think I could get there. Okay. And, you have all the plan Bs or whatever. We don't have children. So I think that makes me think differently about it because I can't have that help in my older years. So I've had to think about those things probably more than other people my age. But also having an age difference with my spouse means that we have people in every phase of life at the same time. So, I've got young cousins and they're just kind of starting out, and my husband's parents are the oldest generation now than my parents, then, him, and then some other cousins than me. And so and living in West Virginia is more, the family interactions are different. People don't leave and go away at the same rates as other places. People are a lot less mobile, just partly because of the geography of West Virginia, but partly because of it's very matriarchal. Like you want to stay close to mom, I think more so than other places that we've been and we travel. So that has affected how my husband and I have had to plan. We just have had to from the outset. Whereas other people, I think, can put it off until later. But if you put it off too long, then it feels too close and unpleasant to think about. A great book that one of my friends recommended I read was called Being Mortal, and it's about healthcare at the end of life and elder care. And then I also just happened to be able to go to a presentation at the school where I was working and helping out this year. They had a man come who's a specialist in elder law. And so he was talking about how to protect your assets from nursing home costs, how to spend down in a way that's legal, how to make sure that the surviving spouse has enough. And so it's pretty interesting, and it juxtaposes the difference between planning and not having a plan at all. And so I'm going to see that lawyer that I heard speak next week in order to help my parents kind of set up a plan, because they know how important it is, because they had to get drugged through this other stuff with our cousin.
Yeah.
Having to get permission from courts and all that stuff. And so it really took a toll on energy and time, and they don't want my brother and I to have to deal with those kind of situations either. So I think there's really a difference in people who've had to deal with it before when there's not been a plan, just the chaos and the stress of it, and versus people who, let's take, for example, my dad's dad. When he was getting older, he had 2 fender benders in 1 month, and then he walked over to my dad, handed my dad the keys, and said, I don't need to be driving anymore.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Most people don't willingly have a situation or criteria set up like that. Well, if I have fender benders, if there's more than 1 in a month, then I will give up my keys voluntarily. A lot of people, that's your freedom. So you don't want to give up your car keys.
Yeah.
It's much, much easier if you have criteria in place before you get to that situation. Like, if this happens, then I will XYZ.
That's a whole other ballgame. I was in a car accident where my car was totaled because the woman, it's a whole long story. It was on the freeway and she cut across the freeway and She was 88 years old.
Yeah.
And that begs the question, we don't have time to talk about it today.
Hmm.
It begs the question, about at what point does it make sense for people to no longer be driving due to cognitive sight abilities, or is it age, or I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And that was not a fun process to go through. And I went through a lot of physical therapy, but
Yeah. Well, it brings us kind of back to full circle to the
yeah,
first question you asked about the individual versus the obligation to the group.
yes.
The individual wants the freedom, but then you can't put the group in danger just to hold on to your individual freedom sometimes. So those are the conversations I think we probably ought to be having more of.
Yeah.
Easy. They're not ever going to be easy. It's not a bumper sticker fix.
Well, and I need to get my act together. I mean, I started to go down the process of a will and what is it called? The medical um,
Power of attorney.
power of attorney. Thank you. The power of
Mm-hmm.
attorney, and I never completed it. So this is going to inspire me to do that. But well, to wrap up, um, you know, actually I want to ask this last question, and then we'll see how this turns out. But the getting rid of belongings and the
Mm-hmm.
pondering, like you asked the question, like, is this also potentially cutting off potential future use? But then it made me think about, or is the letting go um creating new possibilities for your future self? Because I will tell you, in going through that situation I mentioned earlier, selling the house, even 7 months after buying it, getting rid of 95% of my belongings, at the time somebody else was going through something similar, and she was holding on to everything and putting it all in storage just in case she needed it. And I let most of it go. And I thought, oh gosh, am I doing the wrong thing? And I'm like, no, I'm just going to follow my instinct. I don't miss it. I think about things sometimes, but I don't miss it. I don't need it. Yes, I've accumulated a little bit more, but I really do think about, in terms of shopping and buying, like, do I really need this? What do I need it for? And if God forbid something should happen to me, do I want to leave this behind for someone else to deal with? So, what are your thoughts about that? And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that makes it hard to get rid of stuff is, in a way, it feels like you're sacrificing and putting to death your future possible selves. So if I get rid of this clothing that's now too small for me, am I giving up on losing weight? Am I
Right.
giving up on that dream? If I get rid of my arts and crafts supply, am I giving up on the dream of, becoming more artistic and crafty and getting better, becoming a sculptor, becoming a painter? Am I giving up on that dream? If I get rid of the books that I had hoped to read, am I giving up on, being an expert in a certain area? But if you hold on to those things instead of putting to death your future possible selves, you're sacrificing your present self. And like you and I discussed, you don't know who your future self could be if you freed it from all of this baggage and all of these chains. You might be free to go in a position or in a direction that you never ever could have chosen, that all the stuff would have held you back from. So, given the choice between the two, maybe it's safer to. I don't think you'll ever be free of fear, but maybe the fear is the regret of not letting your present self have freedom versus clipping the wings of all the future selves that don't actually exist.
Yet. Yes.
Right.
I love that. That's really powerful. I'm grateful for who I've become. And a few years ago when I went through that, I could have never predicted where I am now. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's staying open and present, and staying open, and also reflecting on all these things. So I hope that those of you that are watching this is starting to make you think about your belongings, your possessions, your attachment to them. Um, have you had those end of life conversations with important people in your life yet? And if you haven't, it might be time. And have you taken the actions necessary? Because when we do leave this planet, there are other living souls left behind. to have to manage that while also grieving the loss of you no longer being present in their life as a whole. So it's a lot to think about. I'm not saying this is easy. And yet I hope those of you listening really got something from this. So Cole, any last comments?
No, that's my hope too. And I always tell people, throw me under the bus. If you need a reason to start a conversation, just be like, hey, I saw this lady on a podcast and she was saying some things. You don't ever feel that way, do you? So
right.
Me under the bus. Use me as a conversation starter.
Thanks, Cole. I appreciate that. And I'm sure others will too. So anywho, thanks for being here. And for those of you watching this, thanks for listening. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And if you got value from this episode, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and comments are always appreciated. And if you're done trying to figure it out on your own, I work with leaders and entrepreneurs who are ready to leap forward and go all in. Connect with me on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. See you next time.